Hi, today I'll be showing you how I paint the green armor for my Grimdark Stormcast Eternals. Today I'll be using one of the new Liberator models from the Skaventide box. Hi, my name is Mark. You may have seen some of my past videos where I mainly focused on Star Wars prop making. The last video I made was 2.5 years ago. In that time, I didn't stop making, but I really pivoted what I was making over towards miniature painting and painting my Warhammer armies. This was a new hobby for me, and I've really immersed myself in that hobby over the past 2.5 years. This is my first video painting Warhammer, and I really wanted to share the process with you. My first army I painted were the Ultramarines. With this army, I really wanted to focus on smooth blends, bright saturated colors, and a nice clean aesthetic. As my painting skills grew, I sort of felt boxed into this original style. And it was hard to really expand on that without the models clashing with the rest of the army. Then, after about 1.5 years, I started my Soulblight Gravelords army. With these, I focused on a more moody atmosphere, realistic weathering and rusting, and just wanted to make these guys look really grim and dark. The issue with this army is from a distance, they're not as visually striking when grouped together. They look incredible one-on-one, but when you get a big cluster shot, they sort of look muddy and dark. I posted these online in a lot of places, and a lot of the feedback I got was people saying they really liked the bright green eyes. I did those with a fluorescent paint, and they really popped against the darker tones in the model. So for this army, I sort of wanted to combine lessons that I'd learned in the Ultramarines and the Soulblight Gravelords. So what I have is a paint scheme here that combines some of the striking fluorescent colors, smooth blends, battle damage, and is very easy to read from a distance, looks great in an army, and also looks great with an individual model. So I'm going to take you along with my process of how I paint the armor. That's going to be episode 1 in this series. The second one will be how I paint the hammers, which I make them look like they're molten metal. Part 3 will be basing. I haven't actually landed on a basing scheme yet, so hopefully I land on one by the time I record that video. And then probably a wrap-up video showing how I do the trim and all of the accent colors. So sit back and I hope you enjoy. Thanks. So here's a side-by-side of one finished model and then the one that I'll be painting in this video. They have slightly different loadouts, but they are the same model. I'm preparing my wet palette with Caliban Green from Citadel and Lauren Forest. I'm using the back of the paintbrush to put the paint on the palette. This paint is going to be stippled onto the model. So it's very important to make sure that the paint is very wet. I'm using a wet palette here, and I did 2 loads of water onto my small dry brush before I put it on the model. So starting from the middle, we're going to do roughly 4 base coats in a stippling manner. As you can see, the paint is still very wet and very transparent. After 1 coat, you can see it's pretty much not covered anything. So we're going to do this, repeat about 4 times to get a nice even coat with a little bit of black still in the recesses. So this is what it will look like when you're done your base coating step. You will have a nice Caliban green on the outward surfaces, and the deep recesses will still remain pretty dark. Once the base coating's done, it's time to start building up the highlights. We do this by mixing in Lauren Forest gradually into the Caliban Green base coat. roughly 1 coat of the color that was all the way on the left of the mix until it's roughly 80% Lauren Forest, and then we'll do 1 coat of Lauren Forest on its own. With these subsequent coats, we're really going to try to focus on the raised edges and some of the higher volumes on the model, leaving the shadows dark. So this is how we're going to start building up our volumetric highlight. Don't need to worry about too much definition here, because we'll get that in a later step. Now it's time to start adding our final brightest highlight color. In this project, I'll be using Mint Twister from Green Stuff World, but really any cold green that is in the turquoise or bluish spectrum will work. I also have an AK Interactive teal color that looks great, but for this I use Mint Twister. It's important that your highlights get colder as you go. When we go to do the wash step, we're going to be using a warm wash, so we want the outer highlights to be a very cold tone, with the shadows and recesses being warm. And with all the other coats of green, we're using a number 1 Drybrush, and we're just stippling it on. Now it's time to start defining the edges with a normal paintbrush, doing some edge highlighting. And we'll be using the Mint Twister, not mixed in with any of the other previous paints, to give it a nice bright highlight that stands apart. When edge highlighting in this style, I like to use the tip of the brush instead of the edge. That gives a less uniform edge, and it really ties it in better with the rest of the model. Now we'll be grabbing a dark warm brown to do the battle damage. A lot of people will use Rhinox Hide from Citadel. I like the German camo black brown from Vallejo Model Color. I'll be taking a piece of sponge, and I will be using that to stipple it on the model. I hold it in the tweezers and then just dab lightly, trying to make it look like areas that would get damage are damaged, and areas that are more recessed don't see as much damage, so those stay pretty clean. After the chipping is applied, it's time to add the wash. At this stage, we have a nice, realistic looking weathered surface, and it took me about 15 minutes to get here. For the wash, I'm going to be using 2 inks. One is a raw umber, and one is a forest green ink. I'll be mixing that with retarder medium and matte varnish. My recipe for this wash is 3 parts green, 2 parts umber, 3 parts varnish, and then a squirt of retarder medium just to slow down the drying. In a second cup, I'll be adding a little bit of matte varnish and water from my paint cup. This will be used to soak the brush in to remove the wash from the raised surfaces in the later step. The color of the wash came out a little more brown than I would have liked, so I added some more green to it. Then I'm going to apply the wash over every surface with a large brush. Once it's settled, I'm going to be taking the just matte varnish and using that to wipe it off the raised areas. When doing all over washes like this, it's best to use a large synthetic brush. That way you need to make less trips over to your palette, and you can cover more area quickly. Using a brush dipped in the varnish, I remove the wash from the raised details. This allows me to keep a uniform surface finish across the model, as well as gives me control over the volumetric highlighting. Washes tend to just flow into recesses, but I want a slight tinting on some of the upper surfaces, but this allows me to really control how much tinting I get everywhere. And this is what it will look like when you're done the wash. You can see the buildup of all of the layers with the cold highlights and warm shadows, and it's really starting to look realistic. Since this is an army project, I saved the extra wash I made in a dropper bottle.
The final step is adding streaking effects. I use Crusader Skin speed paint and the same umber ink as before, mixed about 50-50, and apply streaks across the model. I want these streaks to appear greasy on the model, so I don't apply matte medium. This makes them look glossy and really stand out from the rest of the model. When adding the streaks, I do thin vertical lines across the model. Here the lines are a little shaky because I'm painting in a slightly awkward position to film it on camera, but to get the best effect you want to add small thin lines. You can double up the lines to make larger and darker streaks. This wash is also applied across the recesses of the model to give it a more varied surface finish.
And with the final streaks added, the armor is finished. And here it is. I'm going to be posting some glamour shots at the end, but this model is part of a larger army I'm working on. So if you want to stay up to date on what I'm doing with that army, you can follow me on Instagram at MarkMarksMakes. I'll leave a link in the description. If you enjoyed this video and found it informative, feel free to like and subscribe to see the upcoming parts of the series. But now I think it's time to show off some up-close pictures of the model. Thanks.